The Russian economy has faced significant challenges throughout its history, marked by periods of transformation and setbacks. Historically, the Soviet Union underwent substantial economic reforms and industrialization under centralized planning, transitioning from an agrarian society to a major industrial power capable of achievements like winning World War II and pioneering space exploration. However, by the mid-20th century, the Soviet economy began to encounter issues with productivity growth. The centrally planned system, where all economic decisions were controlled by the state, struggled to incentivize innovation and efficiency beyond a certain point. Workers paid equally regardless of output, lacked motivation to increase productivity, leading to diminishing returns in production. Despite these challenges, Russia's vast landmass endowed it with abundant natural resources, including extensive reserves of natural gas and oil. The Soviet leadership capitalized on these resources, investing heavily in infrastructure such as cities and railroads to extract and export these commodities, particularly from Siberia and northern Russia. This strategic push for resource extraction coincided with a global demand surge in the 1970s, benefiting Russia economically. In recent years, Russia has leveraged its cyber capabilities to exert influence globally, with numerous significant cyber attacks since 2014, targeting various sectors worldwide. This cyber prowess has emerged as a notable strength amidst economic challenges. Looking forward, Russia faces a complex economic future. While endowed with vast resources, its economy remains vulnerable to global market fluctuations and geopolitical tensions. The legacy of centralized planning continues to shape economic policies, posing ongoing challenges for innovation and diversification. The trajectory of Russia's economy will depend significantly on its ability to adapt to modern economic realities while navigating its geopolitical positioning on the global stage. The Soviet Union's reliance on oil exports to sustain its economy ultimately exacerbated its fundamental flaws. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, oil and gas revenues became pivotal, used to accumulate foreign currency reserves and import Western technology. While this strategy initially bolstered the Soviet economy, it failed to address stagnant productivity levels. By the mid-1980s, around 70% of the Soviet Union's industrial output was directed toward military production, necessitating further military spending to keep pace with the United States. However, the economic strain became unsustainable. Soviet leaders realized increasing military expenditure was economically unfeasible, prompting them to reassess their Cold War policies. The end of the arms race and the Cold War itself removed the external threat that justified extensive military spending, leading to a shift in Soviet politics and public sentiment. The subsequent collapse of the Soviet political system in 1991 marked a pivotal moment, with Boris Yeltsin assuming leadership of the newly formed Russian Federation. The transition from a centrally planned to a market-based economy under Yeltsin's leadership involved radical reforms known as shock therapy. Overnight, long-standing industrial supply chains and management structures disintegrated, causing many industries to cease functioning. Additionally, subsidies that had propped up inefficient state enterprises were abruptly terminated. This tumultuous period marked the rise and fall of the Soviet economic model, highlighting both its strengths in resource extraction and geopolitical influence, and its critical weaknesses in economic diversification and productivity growth. The legacy of these economic policies continues to shape Russia's economic trajectory today, as it seeks to balance its rich natural resources with the challenges of a modern, diversified economy in a globalized world. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia faced a turbulent transition marked by economic upheaval and political corruption. The privatization of state enterprises during this period was marred by widespread corruption, as powerful former Soviet officials and businessmen leveraged their connections to acquire these assets at minimal cost or through coercive means. Meanwhile, the general population experienced a sharp rise in unemployment and increased poverty. Between 1991 and 1998, Russia's GDP contracted by an alarming 40%. Despite its abundant natural resources, educated population, and once diverse industrial base now in decline. Progress in stabilizing inflation and the ruble in the late 1990s was eroded by the 1998 financial crisis. sparked by excessive borrowing. This crisis led to another surge in inflation and a significant decline in wages, further straining the economy. At the turn of the century, Vladimir Putin assumed the presidency, ushering in a new era for Russia. Initially, Putin pursued reforms aimed at stabilizing the country and modernizing its economy. While his leadership style has evolved towards greater authoritarianism and geopolitical assertiveness over time, during his early years in office, Putin advocated for sensible reforms and initiatives to diversify Russia's economy beyond its reliance on natural resources. Press the like button if you are enjoying this video. Overall, the post-Soviet period in Russia was characterized by a tumultuous economic transition, marred by corruption, economic contraction, and financial crises. Putin's presidency initially offered hope for stability and reform, although subsequent years would see shifts in governance style and Russia's international relations strategy. The legacy of these early challenges continues to shape Russia's economic and political landscape today. Upon assuming the presidency in Russia, Vladimir Putin articulated ambitious economic goals, aiming for the country to achieve a GDP per capita comparable to Portugal by the end of his 2 terms in office. This objective reflected a pragmatic approach to improving Russia's economic standing, considering Portugal then as the poorest EU member. Initially, Putin focused on achieving economic stability and fiscal prudence, implementing measures to rein in military spending and enhance tax collection. His tenure benefited from inheriting an economy that had weathered the tumultuous transition from a centrally planned to a market-based system, positioning Russia for growth. During Putin's early years in office, Russia experienced a robust economic expansion marked by annual growth rates, averaging around 7% from 1999 to 2008. This period of growth was bolstered by several factors. Firstly, the significant devaluation of the Russian ruble made exports more competitive internationally, boosting export revenues. Secondly, a global commodity boom fueled by China's rapid economic growth further augmented Russia's export earnings, particularly from natural resources like oil and gas. Putin's administration also made strides in increasing tax revenues through improved collection mechanisms, contributing to fiscal stability. These economic policies and external factors combined to propel Russia's economy forward during this period, marking it as a phase of substantial growth and relative prosperity. However, this economic success was not without its challenges and criticisms. Some analysts argue that Russia's economic growth during Putin's early years in power was overly reliant on favorable external conditions, such as high commodity prices, rather than sustainable domestic reforms to diversify the economy. Moreover, concerns persisted regarding the concentration of economic power and influence under Putin's centralized governance model, which critics viewed as potentially stifling long-term economic innovation and development. In the years following his return to the presidency in 2012, Vladimir Putin undertook a series of measures aimed at consolidating governmental control and curbing economic freedoms that had emerged in Russia during the previous decade. This period marked a shift away from the liberal economic policies of the early 2000s towards a more centralized approach under Putin's leadership. Putin's strategy involved a systematic reassertion of state authority over key sectors of the economy. He targeted powerful businessmen, known as oligarchs, who had amassed significant wealth and influence since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. By making examples of individuals through legal and sometimes extrajudicial means, Putin stripped several prominent figures of their assets and placed loyal allies in charge of strategic industries and resources. This move served to underline Putin's message. While large businesses could continue to operate, they must adhere to strict guidelines and refrain from involvement in political affairs. Paying taxes became a requisite for operation, but any challenge to Putin's political control was swiftly suppressed. Although these actions did little to instill investor confidence, they bolstered Putin's domestic popularity. Many Russians, disillusioned by the chaotic economic reforms of the 1990s and nostalgic for the stability of the Soviet era, viewed Putin's consolidation of power as a return to order. The sentiment was particularly strong among those who idealized the Soviet Union's centralized control and economic security. Putin's return to the Kremlin also marked a departure from earlier ambitions to modernize and diversify Russia's economy. Prior efforts to reduce dependence on energy exports were sidelined in favor of political goals. This shift prioritized state control over economic growth, leading to increased government ownership in critical sectors such as media, energy, and banking. Consequently, the risks facing the Russian economy today are largely attributed to this emphasis on political aims over economic development. By the turn of the decade following Putin's return to power, Russia saw a rapid increase in state influence across these sectors. Government-controlled entities expanded their dominance, often at the expense of private enterprise. This trend further solidified Putin's grip on power while simultaneously limiting avenues for economic innovation and diversification. In the years following Vladimir Putin's return to the presidency in 2012, Russia witnessed a notable resurgence of state control over strategic sectors of its economy. This included industries such as oil, aviation, and construction, where the government began reasserting influence by either taking direct control of privatized companies or appointing political allies to key positions. This shift mirrored the rise of oligarchs in the 1990s, but was executed with greater discretion, consolidating economic power more directly under state auspices. Simultaneously, foreign investment in Russia dwindled, partly due to waning confidence stemming from Putin's assertive foreign policies. By 2015, Russia's economic landscape increasingly resembled a centrally planned system akin to the Soviet era, where key industries were tightly controlled by the state rather than driven by free market dynamics. This shift was underscored by the dominance of a few major sectors, notably oil and gas, which generated substantial revenues and sustained the economy amidst broader stagnation. The reliance on oil and gas revenues facilitated a protectionist economic strategy dubbed Fortress Russia. This approach aimed to shield the economy from external pressures and sanctions by reducing dependence on Western technologies and trade, accumulating foreign reserves, and propping up domestic industries through substantial government subsidies. This strategy paralleled Soviet practices where uncompetitive industries were sustained by state subsidies, maintaining the appearance of a functional economy despite inefficiencies. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 exacerbated Russia's isolation from the West, sparking a wave of international sanctions in response to what was widely perceived as a violation of international law. These sanctions targeted key sectors of the Russian economy, freezing assets and limiting trade, exacerbating Russia's economic problems. Despite these pressures, Putin's policies continued to prioritize political stability and control over economic diversification and modernization. This strategic emphasis constrained broader economic reforms and innovation, reinforcing a pattern where state dominance in strategic sectors prevailed over market-driven initiatives. Looking forward, Russia's economic trajectory under Putin's leadership remains characterized by its reliance on energy exports and the maintenance of state-controlled industries. This model, while ensuring a measure of stability, has constrained Russia's ability to achieve sustained economic growth and reduce vulnerabilities to external shocks. The Fortress Russia strategy, with its focus on self-sufficiency and protectionism, underscores Putin's commitment to safeguarding Russia's economic sovereignty amidst geopolitical tensions and international sanctions. Since Vladimir Putin returned to the Russian presidency in 2012, there has been a resurgence of state control over sectors such as oil, aviation, and construction. This involved the government either directly taking control of privatized firms or appointing political allies to influential roles, consolidating economic power similarly to the oligarchic rise of the 1990s, albeit more discreetly. Foreign investment in Russia dwindled significantly during this period, influenced by Putin's assertive foreign policies. By 2015, Russia's economic structure resembled a centrally planned system reminiscent of the Soviet era, with pivotal industries like oil and gas generating substantial revenues that sustained the economy amid broader stagnation. The reliance on oil and gas revenues supported a protectionist strategy termed Fortress Russia, aimed at shielding the economy from external pressures and sanctions. This strategy involved reducing dependency on Western technologies and trade, accumulating foreign reserves, and subsidizing domestic industries. It mirrored Soviet practices of sustaining uncompetitive sectors through state support. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 deepened Russia's isolation, prompting international sanctions targeting key sectors and exacerbating economic challenges. Despite these pressures, Putin's policies have prioritized political stability and state control over economic diversification, reinforcing state dominance in critical sectors at the expense of market-driven initiatives. Looking forward, Russia's economic trajectory under Putin continues to rely on energy exports and state-controlled industries, providing stability but limiting sustained economic growth and resilience against external shocks.